Pesko Lunchtime Lecture Committee. I'd like to welcome everybody. Reminder, B. Pesko was a strong advocate for justice, education, and culture, and we do this series in remembrance of B. Red McAllister, this is done by Homestead Center for the Arts. Red McAllister, our president's in the back. Red.
Glad to have everybody here.
We also want to thank First National Bank, our host, and Eleanor Pesko, who sets all this up. She's David Payton's secretary, the president's secretary. She does a lot of work to make this possible. WKLG Productions. Okay, we're ready to go. We don't want to take any more of George's time. George is an old friend of mine. He was born in Key West. Soon after his birth, he came to Redland, not the Redland or Redland. He came to Redland, and with his parents, and grew up in this community. During World War II, toward the end of World War II, he joined the Navy, saw the world, came back, and went to, was it Lindsay Hopkins? Tech High in Miami. And it had a profound effect on George. George became an architect, and still, I guess, is a still licensed architect. There's houses around here he's designed. He designed the Sunday school building at Redland Community Church. But the main thing was he drove the school bus, and he was kind of I guess, a charming guy, because he fell in love with the smartest and most beautiful lady on the bus, his wife Sharon. And they've been married how many years? 65 years. So. George became the first non-political professional postmaster in Homestead. Before George, everybody was a political appointee, which means they probably didn't know much and didn't learn much. George came up through the system, I think, 1948. 49, he joined the post office, became the postmaster in 1972, and was a postmaster until he retired in 1980. His daughter, Karen, is a retired Postal Service executive. Son-in-law works for the post office. And guess who else retired? The gal he met on the school bus. So I'll turn this over to George now. Thank you, George.
This sign, you probably have seen them around the area. They were erected in 1998. Because the area east of Chrome Avenue was hoping for homesteading in 1898. So they started celebrating the centennial of Redland, although not actually the area that was the original part of Redland. And these signs were a result of that. I happen to have a shirt on. I was listed as a historian for that group, and I have this shirt on. It's still, I can still wear it from '98. I haven't put on that much weight. Next. And wake it up. This area here, I think you went a little too far there. Okay. This is a monument that's in Tallahassee that was established there in 1824 when Florida became a territory. All land in Florida is measured from this monument. Actually, the way they did of measuring it was set up by Thomas Jefferson in his day. When people started getting over the Appalachian Mountains, they needed to have some system to measure the land, to have a layout where people knew exactly where things were, and they weren't depending on a big oak tree or a boulder that was on the side of the hill as a property line. And as a result, they set up what they call baselines. It ran east and west. They set up meridians that ran north and south. Now, I don't know which meridian, I don't remember which meridian this is, Tallahassee, but the 9th meridian is out in Wyoming. You know, I learned about it with the Union Pacific Railroad. So what this amounts to is at every 6 miles, east and west, north and south, they've got lines, theoretical lines drawn over the map of Florida, so that you can pinpoint exactly where your land is located. So Redland is located, the original Redland was located in Township 56, Range 38 East. Well, Chrome Avenue starts, 38 ends at Chrome, 39 starts on the other side of Chrome. Chrome is a range line. Of course, when the people came here, there wasn't any roads, it's just woods. Next. Going backwards. Now this is the map of the township. It starts at the top at Eureka Drive, is 184th Street, and the township line, 57 South here, is 280th Street, which is Walden Drive. But this is the area that in the early days was considered Redland. The line that comes down across there separates the swamp, or overflow land, as the government called it, on the west side of the line out towards the Everglades. It wasn't considered habitable for humans back in 1900, that area. So Chrome Avenue today is on this line to the right here. Of course, this is the range line, 39 East. 227th Avenue out here is the range line for the other side, which is out, of course, in the Everglades. So each of these squares on here are 1 mile square. There's 36 square miles in a township. This is all just surveying terms. It doesn't mean this is town, but that's the township and the range lines. So next. Yes. Yeah. The red cross-hatched area there on this map, which is the map was published by the Redland District News in 1937, showing the Redland District, as they called it then. And the crosshatch area is the area we'll be talking about mostly today. Next. Now, these squares on here show up is the other map that we had there with the red line. This top square appears at 184th Street. The bottom one down here is at 288th Street. For some reason, I don't know the reason, never did happen to be able to find out why, but Redland was considered going down through to Biscayne Drive, which laps over into the township that we are in today. We're in Township 57, where this building is. And this land here was homesteaded by some people, and then the man died that was homesteading it. His wife sold it to Mr. Chrome, who Chrome Avenue is named after. And there's been a multitude of owners on it since then. Now, the first people that came to homestead in this area was 2 men that had worked their way down from North Florida, catching alligators and selling their hides. They got down here before 1900, which is when this area opened for homesteading. And they had walked all over this area. They had originally planned to homestead in the other section, which is on the other side of today's Chrome Avenue. But after walking all over this end of the county, they decided that they wanted to wait at 1900, and of course, one of them wasn't quite old enough to homestead at the time. And so the first 2 homesteaders were in this area, and the blue area there was homesteaded by Dan Roberts. That's 160 acres there. And the yellow one was homesteaded by Claude Jenkins, the 2 guys that had walked down here. Well, Roberts had turned 21 in 1900, and he was the first person to homestead any land, to make a claim on any land in that township. And Jenkins was the second. Roberts' land was bounded on the north by today's Coconut Palm Drive, on the south by Plummer Drive, on the east by Roberts Road, which was named, of course, named after him in later years, and Redland Road on the other side. The Fruit and Spice Park is on his original homestead. Next. It wasn't long after that, though, that George Kozel came down. He had walked all over this country before it was open for homesteading, and he decided he wanted to claim that strip up there, the purple. And which is now at the corner of Silver Palm Drive and Roberts Road. He filed his claim at the land office in Miami, and they found out about 2 days later that Walter Kozel had been there just the morning before he got there and filed on that same property. So he took his second choice, which is the maroon piece down towards the bottom there, which is bounded by Redland Road on the east, theoretical 192nd Avenue on the west, Plummer Drive on the north, and Bauer Drive on the south. Now, George had been in Cuba after the Spanish-American War, and he was quoted as saying that he didn't get along well with the Cubans because they either wanted to fight or drink or dance, and he didn't do either one easy. Very well at all in any of them. Now, this land filled up slowly. Now, I'll give you, most of you probably don't know what homesteading really means and what the requirements were. First, you have to be a citizen or have taken out papers to become a citizen, applied for citizenship. You had to be at least 21 years of age. You had to move on the land within 6 months after you filed your claim. You must not be away for more than 6 months, not even 1 day. If you were away 1 day over the 6 months, someone could claim your land, and you would lose whatever you had invested in it. You had to improve the property. You usually had to be on the property for 5 years. There were some exceptions. Especially for veterans, they had a veterans preference back then for Union soldiers, but not for Johnny Rebs. So you could claim up to 160 acres, and it didn't have to be a square or any particular shape. It could be L shape. It could be different ways, anything you wanted, a T shape. When you're ready to prove up, you had to file an affidavit that you had completed the requirements, and it had to be witnessed by at least 2 of your neighbors. There were some fees when you filed for your property, and other fees when you went to prove up. Also, a legal notice had to be published in the newspaper. The nearest town that had a newspaper in it, which in our case, of course, was Miami. And you could not sell the land until you had proved up and gotten the title. If someone was taking over your claim, all you could do was sell the value of your improvements. And if you had stayed away over 6 months, they could take it without even giving you a penny. It wasn't long after George Kozel came that his 48-year-old twice-widowed sister filed a claim alongside of him on what would be on the opposite side of Redland Road from what he filed, which makes it underneath the blue section there that Mr. had filed on. Now, she was 48 years old. She was twice widowed. She would be the first single female to file in Redland on a homestead. Her name was Eureka Eleanor Martin. Now, I have copies of Mrs. Martin's paperwork from the time she filed the claim and until she received her patent. 19 pages of paperwork just for that. And I'll get into that later when we get to talking about the other parts of the place. It wasn't long after that George Kozel's widowed mother, who was in her 60s, filed on the claim 160 acres just north of him, which would be the northernmost of the red squares there. She was, of course, the second single female to file in Redland. Charles and Beatrice Sherritt were in their 20s, and they had filed a claim where that green square is. When the Chrome survey crew came through surveying this area in intent of running the railroad through Cape Sable and on to Key West, they found that Sherritt's homestead was the southernmost homestead in Florida. And they have some pictures here of their homestead. This was their house they were building. They had not been on the property long, and you could see that it wasn't mosquito proof. There was plenty of mosquitoes around in those days, really bad. And they also they made their camp here by this house, and they lived partially off the land. And we had pictures here of them cleaning some deer, dressing some deer while they were there. So we did have wild deer in those days back here. And also they had, if you had money like Mr. Flagler had, you could have porters for your safari. So this is the porters bringing their food and stuff down to them. So, and the next we have Mrs. Martin's house. This was her house that 2 stories, log house, and I was in this house as a kid a lot of times, and she and her son, she came with her son, I didn't mention that a while ago, came with her son who was about 11, 12 years old at the time, and they lived in this house up until the mid-30s. And I'm sure they still slept under mosquito netting at night because there was no way to keep any of the bugs or anything out. There were no roads at that time, and you had to walk everywhere you went, just trails. And of course, the mosquitoes were horrible. There's no horses, or very few, and because the mosquitoes would suffocate them in the summertime. This was a lot of stories about mosquitoes killing horses up until the 1914-15 area. John Bauer came, and he thought people spent too much time walking back and forth to Cutler, so he decided to open a store on what is now Redland Road. And he wired his fiancee in Philadelphia, and she came down. They got married in Miami. This is Mr. and Mrs. Bauer, shortly after they were married. He had bought a wagon and a horse to deliver his groceries with from his store. That's Redland Road they were on. They're approximately Walden Drive, looking north. So you can see what the conditions were there. They're just trails. That's all there was. Yeah. He had that horse, and of course, the next summer the horse suffocated by the mosquitoes. This was a later picture taken of where his store was located, which was about 300 feet south of the intersection of today's Bauer Drive and Redland Road. This is looking north. Picture was taken much later. This was about 1910. This picture was made. So this was still wild country at 1910. There was other people came in, and gradually they're slowly filling up. And the gray section there over top of Mr. Roberts' blue square was a German immigrant by the name of Otto Form. And you'll notice that his homestead doesn't run all the way out to the line where Chrome Avenue is today. This is because the area was called swamp and overflow land. And this was all government land, federal government land. They gave it to the state. The state in turn gave it to people for development or different things, and they gave a lot of it to the Florida East Coast Railway subsidiary, the Model Land Company. This land was given to the Model Land Company at the time. The reason it was not available for homesteading was because it was flooded most of the year. This is right across the street from where the golf course is now, North Chrome Avenue. That area would be underwater 2 and 3 times a year with the high water level we had at that time. The gray strip at the bottom was another lady came. Her name was Anna Meeker. She's the third female to homestead in Redland. And Frank Canaan came, and he homesteaded this piece right in here. That is on both sides of Redland Road, running north from Coconut Palm Drive for a half a mile. It was 1,320 feet deep from the road back on each side, but it was a half a mile long. It made up 160 acres. Now, George Kozel's brother came also, and he homesteaded this 160 acres here. You got a family living all right there together. And about the same time, or a little later, a lady by the name of Mariah Florence Gazam, as a Eureka school teacher. She came down to visit her sister in Miami, whose husband was John Fredericks, who the Flagler had hired as a surveyor to lay out the city of Miami, and he in turn later laid out the city of Homestead, the first part of Homestead, the railroad laid out. And she heard of the free land, basically, down here, and she filed a claim on that piece of land without seeing anything. She didn't have any idea where it was, except it was in the geographic area that was open for homesteading. And she became the fourth single female to homestead in Redland. And about the same time, or shortly after, Dan Roberts and Annie Fitzpatrick got married. Now, the Fitzpatricks had homesteaded just south of what was considered Redland. Now, the whole area, at the time this was opened, it opened from all the way from today's Eureka Drive south to 376th Street, which is down where the prison is down south of Florida City. So that area was all opened at the same time. Now, the Fitzpatricks homesteaded and continued to live just south of the area that was known as Redland, early Redland. Now, this is the house that Dan Roberts built for his bride. It was built on Coconut Palm Drive, just west of Roberts Road. It was there until 1945, in much the same condition it appears there. It was destroyed by the hurricane in 1945. Those of you that haven't been here long will find that people here tend to age and date things by hurricane to hurricane. You'll hear a lot of hurricane conversation. And of course, it wasn't long after this, in 1905, that Mariah forgot her impending death, because she thought she was going to die, and that was why she homesteaded, so she could get have the properties to sell so her family could bury her, have the money to pay for the funeral. And she forgot all about that, and she married George Kozel. People slowly continued to come, and some were relatives. Florence Fredericks Wigington and her husband Julius filed across the street here from John Bauer. This was Redland Road. There was no street. I used the term street, but there was no street. There was a trail there. And the Wigingtons filed there, 160 acres. And Mrs. Wigington was a niece of now Mariah Florence Gazam Kozel. And then, about the same period of time, shortly afterwards, filed here. Is a young widow in her 20s. Her name was Alice Hill. And she was also a niece of Florence Gazam Kozel. So they kept coming in. There was had seven homesteads there that were all relatives. Now, the next picture we got here is Mr. Kozel's truck. He bought, did we get to that? We got more. Well, come on, next shot. Just more people kept coming in. We're not going to get all the homesteaders because we'd be here all afternoon. There was close to 100 homesteaders in that area. Mr. Kozel bought this truck in 1905. It's a Rio. Name came from Ransom E. Oldsmobile, who later built the Oldsmobile cars, and they built trucks and whatnot up until World War II. But he bought this truck because he was raising strawberries, and a lot of people think strawberries are some new phenomena here, but they're not. We've had them growing here for over 100 years. He raised them back in '05, so it's well over 100 years. And he raised strawberries and bananas, and he was shipping his strawberries. The railroad was in operation by this time in '05, so that he was shipping them by rail to Miami. And they were for the Flagler's Hotel there, Royal Palm Hotel. And the railroad couldn't seem to get the strawberries delivered in Miami before they started spoiling, for some reason. So he bought the truck to haul them up, and he knew they got there that day. So anyway, this truck had wooden spoke wheels, had hard rubber tires that are about 4 inches wide. It has a chain drive, and had kerosene headlights on the front, and then right in the middle it had like a cyclops light, a acetylene light, which is really very brilliant and gave more light on the street. The engine was under the seat, and it was a one-cylinder engine, but it did the job getting the truck around back and forth to Miami. And homesteaders several times had petitioned the county to do something with the roads, to make some roads here, because they're all just trails. And this road was the result of a 1906 series of petitions. They had in the Miami Metropolis, which was, of course, the paper of the day in Miami, and there was many items in there about how they would do this. They held fundraisers. They didn't raise much money because money was tight down here. They gave land for rock pits, and they built this road, which is today's Redland Road, from Avocado Drive to Ballard Drive. From then on, from there to Silver Palm Drive, it was just a trail through the woods. Silver Palm was rocked over as far as what today is 134th Avenue. Thomas and Cora Brewer came, and they applied and got a homestead. They got a homestead just south of where Bauer was, and they came from Opkahumpka. I have trouble pronouncing that most of the time, and most people do. If those of you are not familiar with Florida geography, that's where the last rest stop is on the turnpike before you get on I-75. It's the best way to tell where it is. And they had grown citrus up there, and the freeze of the 1890s had frozen them out, and they came here, and everybody thought this was going to be a citrus center of the state now. And of course, Tom Brewer became county commissioner, first county commissioner from South Dade County, for Dade County, in 1908. His wife used to complain a lot about her the first time she came down, when it came down to came down to take over their claim. She said that the trails were so rough that the wagon jolted so much it was easier to walk beside it than try to ride, and it broke all of her containers of sugar and grits and whatnot, all mixed together. So I imagine they had a good time, but she was still complaining about that when I knew her 30 years later. But he got up to the county, and he found out the county didn't have any money to build roads with. Of course, you hear that today, the same thing, you know, they're going to can't maintain what we've got. Well, in 1906, a post office was applied for, and they needed a name. So this Frank Canaan, who I mentioned there, had homesteaded on both sides of today's Redland Road north of Coconut Palm Drive. He suggested the name Redland for the area. Everybody, of course, thought this was going to become the citrus center of the state since everything froze out up north. And they didn't want it to be confused with Redlands, California, because at that time, Redlands, California was the center of the citrus industry in California. And so a lot of people, newcomers particularly, have pronounced it as Redlands, and many think that's correct. The Miami Herald has got here in the last couple of years been putting "the" in front of it, THE, and that isn't proper either. But you wouldn't say, if you're talking about a community, you wouldn't talk about the Kendall or the Pinecrest or the Perrine. You'd call it by its name, and it's the same thing here. Now, the store opened in John Bauer's store in January of 1907. And about this time, the number of children were getting a lot, so you go on to the next one there, Karen. And Dan Roberts and Annie, his new wife there, they gave an acre of land on the corner of today's Coconut Palm Drive and Redland Road for a school. The school was built there, and where the Fruit and Spice Park is today. And if you go there, the entrance building to the park and into the gift shop is a replica of the original school. The original school was there on that corner until Hurricane Andrew. Like I say, we date from Andrew storm to storm. Excuse me. Wait, I think you went too far, Karen. You jumped. Oh, okay, we'll go back with that. All right, a number of, it should be, our pictures are out of sequence. This is the Hainland family, which we can talk about much later, but I mentioned it here. They were on their way to a party. It was a big family. The group came down, they homesteaded 4 homesteads, and brought a sawmill with them, and that's where 216th Street got its name, Hainland Mill Drive, because it was the drive near where their sawmill was. Their sawmill was originally on just north of on what is today Redland Road, about 300 feet north of today's Hainland Drive, and it was there while they cut their timbers off of their 4 homesteads. Mr. Hainland's sister was one of the homesteaders there, and she homesteaded one of the tracks, and they got I don't have an electronic brain. I got a card file brain. I have to go through it occasionally, see where I am, and it's thrown me off because I didn't have the Hainlands until later on. But we'll get back to them later. And this is where we should have been. We mentioned earlier about relatives. We had Thomas and Floretta Evans homesteaded here. Their daughter homesteaded here, and their other daughter's father-in-law, who was a Civil War vet, homesteaded this strip. So we got another family there that's got 3 homesteads right close together. Now, the young couple that came, excuse me, was Thomas and Floretta Evans were the ones that had that, and their daughter there was Jessie and Fred Loomis. And then Mr. Marvin Joy, who was a Civil War veteran, did the other one. Threw me out of whack here. I threw my cards and get my brain back in line. Some of you may have known Mrs. Frances Lewis, who lived here. She died at the age of 99. She came at 63 years old, and she was noted for looking for something for nothing. And the stories I've heard, she went through life that way all the time after she got here. But she claimed a mile-long narrow strip along Redland Road, and it doesn't show on this because the main part of her homestead was in the next section below there, the area that we're in right here today. Her friend Anna Longacre, who was about the same age, she homesteaded out near where Bower Drive and Redland Road, Bower Drive and Richard Road cross. So they became the 6th and 7th single females that here. The Evans and the other people up there that I mentioned about the Evans. Well, by the way, when Evans, it did throw me for a loss here because where Evans finished settling up on their homestead, they bought W.D. Horn's Hotel in Homestead, and they renamed it the Evans Hotel, and they owned it. Some of you know that that hotel burned about that period, and they owned it at the time it burned. So the Hainlands homesteaded up here, this, and this, and they had their sawmill here. This is 216th Street here, and this is Redland Road. The sawmill was there, as I mentioned before, about 300 feet north of the intersection. And after they cut everything off there, I guess I'm all out of time here because my card file is missing. Mr. Hainland here was Wellington Blood Hainland. I always thought that was a neat name when I was a kid. His sister, Mamie, homesteaded here. His brother homesteaded here. He had twin sons, Orlo and Oslo, and Orlo, they're here. Oslo didn't want any part of homesteading, and he stayed in Miami. But after they cut off all the wood on that land, they moved their sawmill down on 232th Street out here about where Comfort Road comes through today, and they cut the stuff out, wood out there for the homesteaders in that area. They moved the sawmill back to the original location later and operated, and sat there for years. And some of you know Jack Levy here in Homestead, and his father and uncle bought the sawmill and the steam tractor that operated it, and they set up a sawmill out on Bower Drive at what is now Yetter Road. And they operated there from the late 30s up to the time World War II started. So, and Bernard Walden came in 1907, same time that the Hainlands did, and he opened up what is now Chrome Avenue here. He and his wife cut the trail up to 280th Street, and this was his homestead here. That's where Walden Drive got its name from. Now, the original Redland continued to develop. They had a non-denomination services at the Schoolhouse, and quite a few of the people were Episcopalians. And I have some quotes here from the diary of Bishop William Gray of the Episcopal Church. This is the first record of services at the Episcopal Church in Redland on March 9th, 1906, held by Reverend Clark and mentioned in the bishop's diary. February the 9th, Friday the night, it's in March 9th. A long drive to reach a railway station from Cutler this fine bright morning. Reached Perrine in ample time for southbound train. Reached Homestead, the extreme limit of the railway at present. Found service arranged for night and 5 miles further on. Redland Schoolhouse. I sent Reverend Clark by wagon to hold the service. That was impossible for me to hold the service and meet my appointments back in Miami. Took the train back to Miami. And then in 1907, Sunday, March 17th, Reverend Clark and I held services in Coconut Grove. 18th, took early train to Homestead. It is marvelous how this new country is settling up among the widespread and prevailing coral rock. At night, the schoolhouse, some miles further on, fully 100 men, women, and children had assembled, coming from miles around. So the schoolhouse, of course, was located where the fruit and spice. The Redland Episcopal Church was built on the corner of Redland Road and Bower Drive. John Bower gave land for it, and it's built approximately where the gas pumps are of the Redland grocery that's there today. This is the building's known as the Guild Hall. We'll get back to that in just a minute. And this is the only picture we have of it in here. But this is where the Redland grocery is located today. Same building. The next picture is that's what the Episcopal Church looked like after Hurricane 1926. That's Mr. John Bower standing there looking at the wreckage. Those of you who are familiar with the Episcopal Church in Homestead know that Reverend Jackson came here in 1916 to establish a mission for the Episcopal Church in Homestead, and he also was the minister for this church. And he got tired of driving back and forth to Redland to have services, so he merged the churches into one church in Homestead. And they sold the building to a German Lutheran congregation that held services there until they sold the church in 1922 to the German Lutherans, and they held church services there until it blew down. Then they built a church, their own, on the corner of Bower Drive and Chrome Avenue that stayed there. That building that I pointed out there was the Pioneer Guild Hall. It was, excuse me. This was just a hall, and a group were established by ladies from the Episcopal Church. It was not church connected, but it was established by them. And they had a lot of dances there, and the Miami paper called it the Town Hall for Redland, and had a lot of other names for it, and it was dances and classes, and that's you had voting there, and they still had dances on for years there, even during Prohibition days. And I lived right across the street from this, and I was big enough I could push the wheelbarrow around if you didn't have any, but if there's anything in it I couldn't push it. But I'd go out Sunday mornings after Saturday night dance and pick up the bottles and sell them back to the bootlegger that was filling them up. It wasn't bad because a regular, like a beer bottle, would sell for 2 cents. If it was a flask, I'd get a dime. And when laborers were working for 15 cents an hour at that time, it wasn't bad pay for a kid. In 1911, they finally got around to putting rock on, I call it the northern part of Redland Road, north of Bower Drive up to Silver Palm Drive. And this was a celebration they had of it. This picture was made with a postcard camera, and the man that made it wrote on the back of it exactly what it was, where it was, and everything else. And the tents there were in what is today the 26100 block of Redland Road, which is just about a quarter of a mile north of the Redland Grocery, which we mentioned in Redland, where that church was. And they had something to celebrate when they got the road, got rock on the road. So this is another family that was there that day. Some people were still using horses and mules. You saw the motor vehicles in the other picture. But this picture was taken at Redland Road in Bower Drive. And the roads here were built by convicts, the roadway. This, in the 1910 census, is indication that there was a convict camp on the northwest corner of Coconut Palm Drive and Redland Road. According to the census, the camp was integrated, which was unusual for that period of time because that was really the heyday of segregation. And these trailer-like things you see there were, I'm sure some of you have seen or you've heard of and seen pictures of the old animal cages they used to use with circuses with just bars down the side. And this is what this was. They just had canvas rolled down the side, it had bars across. Everybody slept under a mosquito net anyway, whether you were a prisoner or if you were free out on your land, because the mosquitoes were so bad. But they were used to build the roads. And Redland was beginning to get filled up, as you saw in the pictures back there. And about this time, it was proposed to make a new county of Redland. The people that were behind it was the Miami Land and Development Company. They're the people that gave us Detroit and today called Florida City. And they wanted to take over the part of Monroe County that was on the mainland to make Redland County and include the bulk of the Redland area. Monroe County balked on it, and of course it never happened. Redland history wouldn't be complete without mentioning the Ox Lady. This is Sarah McLean. She was well over 6 feet tall, and a lot of people thought that she was a man dressed as a woman, but one thing was she liked to take baths. So anyone around that had bathing facilities, she managed somehow or other to finagle to spend the night with them and take a bath. And some of the ladies said she definitely is a lady. So this just in here to just show the how the road. This is on Redland Road after it was done. The lady on the left is the Mrs. Lewis that we mentioned, Something for Nothing, and the other one is our friend Mrs. Longacre. And they were walking. That shows how the road went through the woods at that time. If you went anywhere, you walked, and to get where you were going. This is a real steamroller. People call them steamrollers today, but they're not. They're run with a diesel engine most of the time. You may notice there's cleats up here on the wheel in different places. You can see them down here too. And they had those on there so they could pull a plow through the rock, to plow the rock. And they took them off when they wanted to smooth the surface. The man on the ground here is a 3-man crew ran this outfit. The man on the ground is Bob Glenn, who lived here in Homestead for a long time. He was a diver down on the Keys for the Far East Coast Railway when they were building viaducts. And the man up on the machine is Mosier, and I want to call him Ivan because Ivan was a friend of mine. But it's, I can't think of his name now. Reuben Mosier. And there was a third man who's not in the picture, but he went on collecting wood to keep the fire going. But this worked out. Okay, next. This is a picture taken of it working down the road. You can see the smoke from the boiler there. In 1913, we had a big citrus canker problem here, and it was really bad. And we had a big crews that were going around checking groves for canker. This is a crew that was getting sprayed so they wouldn't be spreading the canker to other groves as they inspected them. There was probably, we had over 100 men that was in the crews, but this was one of the groups that were working together. And you notice their mode of transportation there behind them. And this is the Redland Community Church. Mrs. Mariah Florence Kozel was active in the Episcopal Church, and her mother-in-law, Mrs. Bodil Olson Kozel, gave land for this church because her mother-in-law was in the other. I think it was a mother-daughter-in-law conflict there somehow or other. And it might have been, but I always felt that she gave the land for that church. And that, of course, Hurricane Andrew blew that one away. This is Reverend George Doole. He was a longtime pastor at that church. And the area was pretty well closing up here, getting filled up with people. It was almost filled up. And next we have a picture, the item from the Miami Metropolis about the school. They said it was going to build the high school at Silver Palm, but they named it Redland. Why? I don't know why Redland name became popular, but it remained popular to this day. I always thought Silver Palm would have made it. This is Redland Farm High School when they first built it. This is the auditorium back here. They built 4 more rooms back here in 1918. This is when they opened in 16. In 1918, they built 4 more rooms here, and you wouldn't be able to see the auditorium. But I have a couple of little interesting things about the school. It opened in 1916, but it didn't have a telephone until 1935. And up until 1926, a neighbor had phones, and the school board said, well, if anybody gets hurt, they can call on the neighbor's phone. So that went on. Then they lost their telephone in the 26 hurricane, and the economy was so bad after the 26 hurricane. Actually, the depression started here in 1926 instead of 29 like it did nationwide. We were in bad shape back then. But anyway, in 1916, in 1935, they finally built a new telephone line from Chrome Avenue over to the school and established the school. And along with that, in 1932, the county bought, there's a lot of agitation about fire protection in Redland, or in the extended Redland area. And this, it bought this fire engine in 1932. Then they said they didn't have anybody to man it. So it set until 1935, and they hired a man, Mason Roberts, became the first Dade County fireman, and was stationed at Redland School with his fire truck. And they had the deal worked out where if you had a fire near your house, the fireman came, but he was by himself, and you had to help him. So they set up a deal so that any of the boys that were in the Future Farmer organization of the school would go out with him on school days. Well, we all greeted that with enthusiasm, anything to get out of school. This was the first school buses Dade County bought, and no school had them until they bought these for Redland. And these were purchased really about 1918 for Redland School. And kids called them Texas Ranger buses because they were built on a Ranger truck chassis. And there were 4 of them, and they were the 4 for Redland School. The next picture is also of one of their buses. And this young lady here, you see a me up there, that is Mr. John Bauer's daughter, Catherine. Some of you probably knew her as Catherine Baker. She lived here in the area for years. And this young man on this side was George Kozel, Jr. He had his hand in the pocket there. In 1926, they bought a group of buses like this. There's a Model T Ford tractor unit with a wooden box on solid rubber tires, and some of them had, this one has a door in the front, some of them had a door in the back with steps that went down, and usually one of the senior boys at school drove the bus. I think Lester Woodbury was driving this way. Of course, we had more relatives around and more places filled up. And Fred Kozel here had this homestead. He lost that because he stayed over 6 months away and somebody claimed it. So he lost what he had invested there. And the place was just about filled up by this time. And Tom Post homesteaded. He came with his mother, Mrs. Martin, and he homesteaded this out here, and this was the last real homestead that was made in Redland. And he was about 11, 12 years old when he came here, probably 1910. He was 21, and he filed on that. Just before that, there's a little square up here that a man by the name of Ben Plummer homesteaded on, a young man. His parents had come in 1902, and that's where Plummer Drive got its name. Charles T. Plummer was his father, and they homesteaded that. It became a rather diverse community of different nationalities. We had quite a few German immigrants here, Italians, Swedes, Yankees and Southerners. And we had one man in particular that I remember being he was a Spaniard, and he had quite an accent. And his hero was George Washington. And he would he had all kinds of stories about things that Washington did, that some of the things I'd never heard of at school and stuff. But he called me Georgia Nawash instead of calling me Georgia. So I was his friend. So anyway, this young lady that had homesteaded right here, Alice Hill, married another German immigrant that was out here. It was called Eric Gritzbaugh. And so he ended up here with the Kozel family being related 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 homesteads that were all related into the Kozel family, although not closely related. There was a family tie. And some of the settlers came in and they settled up, and they bought Delco generators and Kohler light plants and things like that. And some of them used acetylene for lights. And they really, things were getting pretty good shape. This is the banner advertising a subdivision that was right on Redland Road, and it was put up in front of the post office advertising it. This was next picture. This was John Bauer's second store. You saw the other one where he had the post office there. He sold his store in about 1916, and he came back in 1920 and opened this store, and he became postmaster again from 1920 to 1926, and the post office was in this store. And this was about 100 feet south of the intersection of Bauer Drive and Redland Road on the east side of the road. And this building stayed there until the 1926 hurricane. This was the Redland Grocery. It was on the northwest corner of Redland Road and Bauer Drive. The fruit stand there was Mary Heinland's. You see her name attached to the Fruit and Spice Park today. And the boy sitting on the bench there in front, the one on the right is Jack Levy, as I mentioned before, his family, and his brother Bill and his sister Catherine. They're waiting for the school bus. And that's my dog out in the road there. It's Duke. And this is what it looked like after the 45 hurricane. We go into the expanded Redland. Now, the expanded Redland has a ghost town, Aladdin City. There's not much left of it. Ghost town. Okay, this is the plat of 1/4 of what they had planned at Aladdin City. This is what they filed with Dade County, and this was 1/4. It's going to these roads are going to make a complete circle, and there was a rock pit here that was going to be their pond in the middle of town, and there's not much left. They had a promotion, and January 14th. This was the bank building they had built on the property, facing down on Hainland. This was at Hainland Drive and what is today Farm Life School Road. And they had a promotion. They flew down the material to build the houses. They had 6 planes they had chartered, and they had a little airstrip out there. And they flew down and they built a house in one day. All the workers were there, the concrete workers, the plasters, the carpenters, the electricians, the plumbers, everybody was there. And they started at 7 o'clock in the morning, and by dark they had the house completed, painted, and landscaped. Of course, now, when the 1926 hurricane came, it didn't take that long to take it down. But they did build a lot of houses that were sturdy, and they stayed there up until Andrew time. And the only evidence of the town that's left is 3 street signs: Alabama Circle, Aladdin Boulevard, and Baghdad Street. That's all is left of there. And when the Seaboard Railroad came through in 1927, they built a station at Aladdin City, and it was one of the larger larger stations that they built down this way. They were hoping to get some of the business from Ranch, Princeton, and Goulds from the Florida East Coast Railway, but it never happened. It didn't.
Where's this street sign, George?
They are just off of Hainland Drive at Farm Life School Road. Yes.
I think there might still be a sidewalk.
There used to be sidewalks all along Hainland Drive, but I think they bulldozed most of them out. There's a nursery in there now.
In the circle.
Little scraps of sidewalk left, yeah. But that's basically all that's left of it. And this is Silver Palm Historic District. It is in front of the old Silver Palm School, which was built in about '04. And I don't know why the name Silver Palm didn't catch on instead of Redland. I wondered at that, why it didn't. I always thought it was a catchier name than Redland was. And but anyway, it was homesteaded about the same period because it opened for homesteading in '98, but like everything else, it was real slow filling up. And across the street from this, we got a picture of Will Anderson's store. Now, Will Anderson homesteaded where Redland School was built. He gave the first 5 acres for the school when they built the school, and sold the rest of it to the school board. But he had a road named after him out there at part of 240th Street, is Anderson Drive, and he didn't homestead until 1902, so there still was plenty of land homesteading over in that side of the street. This is the Silver Palm Methodist Church. The Methodist Church had a breakup in about 1850 over slavery, and they organized a South Church and North Church. We had both North and South churches here in Homestead. They were about 2 blocks apart. And of course, the North Church was north of the South Church. Headquarters for their missions for the North Church was in Jacksonville, and the South Church headquarters was in Key West. And they worked towards each other as churches and communities got built across the state. Now, this was on the corner of what is today is 154th Avenue and 232nd Street. And the only trace of this that's left, 1945 did away with the building, but the old Sunday school building is still there and it's used as a residence today. And it happens to be the first place I ever talked in public, and it was a Lions Club meeting when I was in the 8th grade school. Now, we got, this is the Valin family. I'm one of the descendants. She's somewhere in here. Lydia, stand up. You haven't left, have you? There she is, back over there. Yeah, she's a granddaughter. They homesteaded in the 1898, 99 years, and Valin Drive, there's named after them. Klaus and Clara. Klaus died before they proved up on their homestead. Clara was tough, and she stayed and kept it up and proved up on the homestead. And of course, some of that toughness comes on down through. Lydia's, I've known her since she was 5 years old. So she and I. Well, we got some of them out there. Maybe I keep my hand up there to hold it. Okay. But it's the toughness, came on down in that family because her grandson, Hugo, many of you know him or most of you have heard of him because he sailed across the Atlantic in a boat that wasn't as long as he was tall. He made 2 trips across. One time he got in and the Coast Guard towed him in, but he didn't want to get towed, but they towed him anyway. And he did it again so he could make his sail all the way to shore. But that toughness came through the family. This is the Lindgren family. John Lindgren, the father, and have Al and Carl. And Al Lindgren was one of the people that brought scarifying here so he could break up the rock. He did that. He ran that business for years, up until I guess probably the 50s. And Carl developed a trucking company. This is kind of a strange thing to be putting in a thing on Redland, but actually this locomotive was used in Redland. It was owned by the Florida East Coast Railway, and when they were getting near finished down on the Keys in about 1916, they started selling off some of their equipment, and this was sold to the Drake Lumber Company, which operated out of Princeton, and they had about 15 miles of track all out through Redland. And they expanded their tracks and used this locomotive to haul the logs and stuff to the mill. This locomotive's got a little history. The Florida East Coast Railroad purchased this in 1892. After the extension got pretty well completed, they did sell off the old equipment. It was sold in August of 1916 to the lumber company, and it was original as it was the time it was purchased, except for the headlight. It was an updated headlight. They had electric lights by that time. Next, we got a picture of Preston Lee and Strickland from their wedding in 1911. And I put this in here because Preston was a road man. He was county commissioner from 1917 to 23, and he is responsible for the good system of roads we have in South Dade County. He was a county commissioner in that time. His first project he took on was he had Cutler Road, getting some of the kinks out of it because it was a pretty kinky road back then, a lot of curves and whatnot. And he got that, and down as far as schools, and then the other roads, he was really outstanding person doing that. And their daughter, Annie Ruth, if any of you knew her, she looked just like her mother. And the signs entering Redland farming area, they've been put up by Dade County. Sid Robinson has been keeping the county on the stick about replacing them, putting them back up when they get knocked down. And the next picture. This is the same map that we were showing earlier for the Redland District News, 1937. And the crosshatched area there was the area where people asked to be included when we were planning to incorporate Redland in 2004. Now, I'm saying these people asked to be included. It wasn't mandatory or anything. They asked to be included in Redland, which you see the expanded size of that area. So we could spend the whole afternoon here talking about Redland, but and expanded Redland, the area. So if anyone has any questions. Yes, sir.
You mentioned about Redland Road. When did Chrome become the more dominant road?
It was in the late 1929 is when it came. In 1929, up to 29, it only went as far north as today's Eureka Drive. It was extended to the Tamiami Trail in 1929. They were going to build the trail starting in 1916, and they took them a long time to get it built. And two men, I mentioned Mr. Bauer in this several times, and Tom Brewer. They came with an idea when they first started building the trail. They built it from west to east. That's why it took so long. I guess it's part of it. And Mr. Brewer and Mr. Bauer put a proposition to extend Redland Road north to approximately 100th Street and then over to the range line, as they called it then. Crum Avenue, of course, didn't exist. It was a range line, just mark on the map, and then north to the trail. They were going to do this in 1916. But the only problem with it, when they wrote up their bill, as they were presenting to the county and to the people to vote on it, was it was going to be a tax district. And so those two words, tax district, that killed it. And so they ended up not having a road to the trail until 1929. Well, yeah, the way you had to go, if you lived in Homestead, the incorporated area of Homestead, you would have to go either out Mowry Street or you could go up Crum Avenue. Crum Avenue went as far as we call it Crum's Corner, this at Episcopal Drive. Then go to Redland Road. Then you went north on Redland Road, Silver Pond Drive. Then you went east on Silver Pond Drive to what is today 134th Avenue. And you went up that to Quail Roost. Quail Roost ran just like it does today. Yeah, that's the way it came when the Homesteaders first started coming in. They came that way, and over to Peters and Burine, and then you went across on what is now Richmond Drive to Cutler, and you went up Old Cutler Road. Of course, Old Cutler Road isn't where Cutler Road was back then, because it was in part of the Deering Estate where Chapman Field is. It went through there. It was through where the Montgomery places there to have, and on up, and it was closer to the bay than what it is now. And it was Perkins and Dickens.
So to follow that through just to finish, so if they took that route, would you get off where, would they ship stuff from where the South Deering estate is there in?
Yes, that's
where
where the mail boats would come in.
Okay, so that's.
The mail boat just came around from Key West, it originated in Key West. Miami wasn't anything there. And it originated in Key West. It stopped at the islands along the way and stopped at Cutler and then went on to Miami. Yeah.
How far east is the Redland area go?
What they consider now
Now,
is over to the US one.
that's what I figured, but it's really not, it's across.
No. Now, originally, talking back 100 years ago, the 100 years ago, it was west of what is now Plum Heaven when it started. And in those days, it was there were several communities like Silver Pond, Eureka, but Redland was the only one that got a post office, asked for it. And one thing I left out, there was a move to incorporate Redland in 1914. And this was because they got a post office established then, and then they got a rural, I didn't mention about the rural route, they're looking, and Mr. Kozel was very instrumental in this, and he got one of the senators, and he got an appointment with the president, and they did those things back in those days, and we got to talk to the president. So he got an appointment with the president about establishing a rural route out of the Redland post office. They, in turn, said they got the postmaster general. You disconnect me or shut me up. But anyway, they got the postmaster general. They decided they were going to have a rural route out of the Redland post office. And when the postal inspectors came to establish the rural route, they came to Homestead on the train. That's as far as they got. And the people out in Redland said the Homestead stole the rural route. And the man that was, he was postmaster when I went to work at the post office. After I became postmaster of Homestead, he told me, he says, Redland got it back on Homestead. I was the third person that lived in Redland that was a postmaster in Homestead.